In our last video, we learned about creating a hierarchy of classes, superclasses and subclasses, and we saw some diagrams and described why we might want to do it, but we didn't see how to do it in Java. Let's take care of this right now. There's going to be a new keyword on our class statement called extends. So to create a class as a subclass of another class, we use the extends keyword on the class statement. So we get public class checking account extends bank account. If I don't use an extends, that means it extends object. Remember, that's the default class. That's the head of the hierarchy of all classes in Java. But if I want to create my own hierarchy, public class name of my class extends name of the superclass. And then the normal opening and closing brace with all of our methods, variables, constructors inside of those braces. So let's see an example. We can instantiate an object of instantiate an object of a subclass just the same way we would as if it were any other class. I want a checking account, I say checking account, give it a variable name, my account. Instantiate it by saying it equals a new checking account and pass in whatever parameters the constructor wants. Once I've done that, I've got a variable called my account that can do everything a checking account can. And a checking account, since it extends a bank account, can do anything a bank account can. So let's see what we do. I go myaccount.deposit $300, and it finds the deposit method in the checking account class. I do string name equals myaccount.getName, and it finds the method getName. It happens to find it in the bank account class, but in the place where I'm calling it from, I don't need to know that. All I know is I've got a variable called myaccount that's a checking account, and a checking account can get its name. Now, if I instantiated something at the superclass level, let's say I've got my second account, which was a new bank account, not a new checking account. Well, this is now going to know how to do everything a bank account can do, or everything bank account superclass can do, but it won't know anything about checking accounts. So if I do my second account deposit $300, this won't work. Eclipse is going to put red marks all over your code and say, no, there's no deposit method available for you. You can't do this. However, you could do a getName, because remember, getName was implemented up at the bank account level. So this one would work just fine. Some more keywords to worry about. We've been in the habit of declaring all of our state variables as private. There are other options. You can make them private, which means the variable is accessible only within the class in which it's declared. That's generally going to be best for us. That's what I always do with all of my state variables. But Java gives you a couple of other options. You can make them protected. The variable is accessible within the class and all of its subclasses. Or you can make it public. The variable is accessible from any class whatsoever. That's never recommended. And the examples are on the next page. So here I've got a little bit of code from bank account and a little bit of code from checking account, which extends bank account. So bank account is the superclass, checking account is the subclass. In bank account, I've got a private variable account name, a protected variable account number, and a public variable balance. Down here in some method in checking account, if I go account name equals Mr. I, that won't work. How come? Because account name is private to bank account. But I can do account num equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because account num being protected means it's available to bank account and all of its subclasses. And I can do balance minus equal $100. That will work because balance was public. Now let's talk about constructors in a subclass. Now we know that all methods and variables in a superclass are inherited by methods of the subclass type, but constructors are not inherited, with one exception that we'll talk about in a minute. Constructors are not inherited, so you should always plan to create constructors in your subclass. Remember, it's the job of a constructor to initialize all of the state variables of an object. If some of those state variables really live in the superclass, then why not have your constructor call the superclasses constructor to initialize those variables, then initialize the rest of them yourself. That way you can always leave your state variables private, as long as you can get to your superclasses constructor. Let's see how to do that. Here I've got bank account is the superclass, checking account extends bank account, so checking account is the subclass. 3 private variables in bank account name, account num, and balance. So I've got a constructor that passes in a name, number, balance, puts the values into the state variables. We've done this before in several of our programming assignments. Now, checking account extends bank account, and I've added one new state variable, transactions. So now checking accounts have an account name, an account number, a balance, and transactions. So let's say I've got a constructor for checking account that passes in the name, the number, and the balance. I can say, hey, superclass, find the constructor that takes a string variable, and a double. Execute yourself. This says superclass constructor. I just use the word super and the parameters for the constructor. So it's going to go up here and say, oh, name, number, and balance, I'll put them in these variables. Now it returns, and I take care of the rest of my initializing. I'll initialize transactions. You can call your superclasses constructor by using the super keyword. Here's a restriction. If you do this, it has to be the very first statement of your constructor. I couldn't switch the order of these 2 lines and have them work. Part of creating a checking account is to say, hey, a checking account, you're part of a bank account, so I'd better initialize bank account. Hey, bank account, you're part of an object, so I better initialize object. Java goes through all of that at the beginning of the construction process. Now, we said there was one constructor that is inherited. In general, they're not. The only exception is if you create a subclass and you put in no constructors whatsoever, that's the exact same thing as if you put in one constructor with no parameters whose only line of code was super parenthesis parenthesis. In other words, if your superclass has a default constructor, meaning a constructor that takes no parameters, it automatically gets called if the subclass has no constructors. That's the only time something is inherited, and that isn't going to happen very frequently for us. So get in the habit of writing constructors in all of your subclasses.